Oh, yeah. Testing.
Okay, so we're back on the record in Public Service Commission case 9749. Ms. Mosier, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Hoover and Commissioners. Melanie Santiago Mosier, Commission Advisor. We're glad to get restarted with our hearing on the Geothermal Network Systems pilots under the Warmth Act. And we're going to start our hearing today with the Honorable Lorig Charkoudian with the Maryland House of Delegates.
Thank you. So for the record, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, Chair and Commissioners, it's an honor to be here. I want to thank you for your flexibility in putting me on at this time. I apologize that I was not able to be here in person yesterday. I was a member of the Southern States Energy Board, and we were at our annual meeting. Happy to report we did pass my resolution to support extended additional funding for LIHEAP, so that's good news for everyone in the room.
So that's going to fix the LIHEAP problem.
It'll fix it.
Excellent.
It'll fix it. Well, we at least need to maintain and expand the funding. So I appreciate, and I do want to say that I was able to, I was kind of running out of sessions, checking my phone like I was watching the Super Bowl on it, tracking the conversations here, and I got to see portions of the day, but not all of it. So I'm happy to answer questions to the extent that I can about conversations that happened yesterday, and I will at some point catch up on the whole day. I actually want to start with a really significant, heartfelt thank you, and to talk about how proud I am to be from Maryland, how proud I am to have the partners that are working on this, and how proud I am to have this Public Service Commission taking this on. I think I recognize that this is big and it's hard, and we're at the forefront of something amazing. And I just want to remind us that we can do big, hard things, that we can put our minds to it, and the brilliant brains that are in this room, some with very different opinions about how we should get it done, but all of those brilliant brains, we can do this. And I think we're at a time in our history where it's very easy to be cynical, where it's very easy to give up on the hard stuff. And that is not who we are in Maryland. So I'm proud that we're here. I'm proud that we're willing to, and that you as a commission were willing to take 2 days for this conversation, that your staff has put in the kind of time and effort that it has, that the staff and of everyone was here yesterday and is here today. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I think it's a challenging thing that's in front of us, but I think it's very doable, and I think we're going to look back and be glad that we put in the work to get it right. So thank you to everyone, the folks I'm looking at, the folks behind me, folks watching at home, folks who were here yesterday, and all the others who were part of this. So having said that, I think if I can summarize a lot of where people seem to be on this, I would start with we love it, it's got so much potential, and the cost seems really high. And so I think that is really where I think the most of our work needs to be done. And I think there's a lot of potential. I think the numbers that we're looking at are not the accurate numbers. I think that the cost that we're looking at, that we're going to look at in its in the final numbers, are probably going to be a little bit higher than what this might look like to scale long term. And I think that's normal in the case of a pilot, that you would have costs that are a little bit higher because we're learning and we're figuring it out. And so I think that's acceptable. But I don't think that we need to accept the numbers that we're looking at right at this very moment. And I say that because I think, first of all, having spoken to folks at HEAT, who I understand were here yesterday, I think I spoke to them last night extensively. I understand that they offered to look at 30%, 60% design. They provided some initial comments to me. I don't know exactly what they've provided in detail to the commission. I know they've offered to work with BG&E and Washington Gas. But I think that from just a design perspective alone, I suspect that there's a significant amount that can be done to bring these costs down. I think that, and I can sort of off the top of my head say what I think those things might be, but I think that I'm not the it would just be coming from a broad understanding. I'm not the technical expert, but I've spoken enough to technical experts that I believe these numbers can come down. I also do want to say that I think the tax credits are as safe as anything is right now, and so I do think that we should move forward with an expectation that that we're likely to get those tax credits. The question mark about the homes and HERO money, I think, is a reasonable question mark. You know, I'm hopeful that that's still coming. There's a lot of questions about the timing and the contingencies that come with that, so I understand why that still is a question that's out there. So that's on the costs overall, which I do believe will come down. The second thing that is sort of related to cost, but is more related to the cost-benefit analysis, is the question about how effectively the grid benefits are being measured. And I think that that one of the issues that does need to be addressed is the issue of the backup resistance heat. I think it's totally inappropriate to have backup resistance heat on these systems. I don't think that the resistance heat is needed, but furthermore, it really defeats the purpose of this approach. Like, the point of this approach is that ground source heating and cooling is the most efficient way to heat and cool a building, and so all of the grid benefits of not having to build out a grid for resistance heat, you only get if you're not building out the backup resistance heat. So I think that the projects should not move. The commission shouldn't approve of backup resistance heat as part of this. And if you look at, like, you know, right now our gas systems don't have backup propane, you know, to go with them. We don't, you know, if the gas system goes down and the gas company comes out and fixes it, or doesn't, or takes whatever the time it takes to get that done, there's not a propane tank in all of our homes in case something happens with the gas system. So I think it's inappropriate to have that. It's not necessary to have it, but furthermore, you lose the majority of the grid benefits if you're building out the grid for the resistance heat, which is your backup. So that's really key, and that gets to this question of how effectively the grid benefits have been analyzed in the proposals. I'm not sure that they've been analyzed as effectively as they could. I think it's worth, as we're going through this, it may or may not ultimately be what the commission bases their final decision on, but I do think it's worth making sure that we have our heads better wrapped around this question of the grid benefits at some point in this process. I think what we're looking at right now in the proposals are sort of insufficient as it relates to that. And I also think that if the cost-benefit numbers, as they're presented right now, are important to the commission, it would be important to get Washington Gas to run their numbers in comparison to an air source heat pump system as opposed to the gas system. I actually don't think that their comparison to the gas system is quite right either, but I think that the what the bill really talks about is assuming electrification, and then this as the cost-benefit of this system, and BG&E's proposal did that. They sort of ran the numbers compared to both. So that was on the cost benefit. I think somewhat related to the cost benefit, I still think that, and again, this, you know, the commission can decide how important it is to do this right now, but I want to talk about demand response. At a time that we're looking at putting as much storage on the grid as possible for you know, peak shaving and balancing load, I think that we're missing out on some of the demand response potential of these systems. I think about this as having two real benefits. So geothermal on its own, ground source geothermal, network geothermal on its own, is going to shave peaks just by being super efficient and not ramping up its impact in the hottest and the coldest times. So it sort of has that as a peak shaving benefit, period. And then on top of it, there may be an added benefit, and this is where Colorado Mesa University has had some experience in preheating and pre-cooling the loops in preparation for the hottest and coolest period. So the system by itself does the peak shaving, but there's the possibility of additional peak shaving by essentially turning it into a storage tank by preheating or pre-cooling, so that then when it gets real hot or real cold and everyone turns up or down their thermostats, it has no additional impact on the grid because the system is already preheated or pre-cooled. So you still have the controls in people's rooms, but you can predict usage in advance. And so at this scale, it's probably not going to be a total game changer. But as we're thinking about this as a possibly scalable approach, it's really worth making sure we're thinking about and understanding that aspect of this as well. I'll just mention two other things, which is before I get into, so induction stoves, I think folks talked about that. We should put induction stoves and also heat pump water heaters into these systems. With a project at this cost, the small difference that an induction stove is going to make, I think, is worth it to get quality. Where there's a lot of conversation about environmental justice, and I won't repeat it. It kind of goes without saying. This whole legislation was designed to address environmental injustice, and to put this kind of time and effort in, and then to have a subpar experience with an electric resistant stove is just feels like it's a waste. It's sort of a loss of an opportunity. Also, air source heat pump hot water heaters, I think, are important. Again, slightly more expensive upfront, but less impact on the grid. And I'm not sure that it was clear in the proposals which kind of hot water heaters would be replacing the gas ones. Finally, I want to talk about the workforce issues. I know there was significant conversation during yesterday about this. I think that there's one piece that I think is low-hanging fruit, even as we continue to work on some of the ongoing issues. So I think there's obviously construction, and then there's maintenance. I'll start with maintenance, because I think that's where we sort of maybe have the lowest hanging fruit. There isn't a lot of experience in this country on how to maintain a network geothermal system. So people know how to maintain pieces of them, but there's right now no certification for like maintaining a network geothermal system. The experience in doing that really is, in a housing complex in Texas, in a university in Colorado, like extensive experience, and then a year of experience in Massachusetts. Heat is in the process of, will be probably developing a certification for maintenance of these systems, and I think it's reasonable to say that there's that there shouldn't be a lot of controversy in saying to both Washington Gas and BG&E that the expectation is they will have their internal staff trained in whatever training becomes available, and that they will be able to maintain the systems. The maintenance tasks themselves are very similar to the tasks that they're currently maintaining, and I think that there's likely to be a certification between now and when these systems are built, and so they can go through that, and the companies can pay for that training, and that can be done. I don't think there should be any controversy about that question. Backing up to the construction, where I know there's more conversation about who's the best folks to do the construction, I think that what the bill does is it basically says that the intention is we have folks who have been working on gas systems and have kept us safe and warm for decades, and we want those people to have jobs going forward in a new decarbonized economy, and so the maintenance is a piece of that, and to the extent that the construction can incorporate in-house workers, I think that's ideal. Of course, there's a need for there to be a community benefit agreement that includes significant requirements for any contractor that also might get the job. And so if there, to the extent there are contractors, which I expect there will be some, maybe all contractors, they would need to be part of the community benefit agreement with prevailing wage and apprenticeships and so on and so forth. So again, I think I think folks know, and it was reflected in yesterday's conversations and your comments, that really the idea is when we talk about environmental justice, that's both about people who have been disproportionately harmed by environmental injustice, disproportionately harmed by climate change, disproportionately harmed by affordability, but it's also about workers and what happens to folks who have done their level best to keep us safe and warm, and making sure we're not leaving them out in the cold as we start to do a transition. So those are the big pieces that apply to really both of the proposals. The two things I just wanted to mention that are specific to BG&E's, I do want to mention that the energy efficiency upgrades in the Washington Gas territory, the K Management, who manages the complex that this is going to be focused on, has already applied to MIHA, which is what MIHA is the Low Income Empower multifamily. And so they've started going through that process, and Victory Towers has just recently gone through an efficiency upgrade. I would strongly encourage that BG&E get the buildings involved, started on that process, because that's something that even if the pilots aren't approved, there's a benefit to using this opportunity and the engagement with those building owners to get them the MIHA upgrades, so that they can have that and have that benefit regardless. And starting that now, even as, there might be iterative processes of approval through 30% design, costs coming down, whatever that ends up looking like, starting that process now makes the whole thing take less time, right? Because there's all the questions about the extension of time. So I would say that, I commend K Management, Victory Towers, Washington Gas, that process getting started, and would urge that the BG&E process similarly get started on that. And I think the benefit is that then when we're doing the community engagement, people are going to definitely get something. I know there's been hesitancy from BG&E to do too much community engagement, with the concern that if the projects don't go forward and they've promised something, but at least with the efficiency upgrades, we know everyone gets some benefit, even if it's not the full benefit of the project. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, any questions? Commissioner Barbe?
Well, first of all, it's always great to see you, Delegate. I want to start by complimenting you on something that has nothing to do with this. I want to compliment you for the presentation you made before the PJM Governor's Technical Conference in Philadelphia, especially highlighting the noteworthy victory you had with respect to requiring transparency for the votes of our utilities at all levels of the PJM governing structure. And I also want to again compliment you for highlighting the fact that we knew about the shutting down of Brandon Shores 5 or 6 years before it was scheduled to happen, and the fact that the PJM network did literally nothing to prepare for it. I think it was important for that to be said before that group of people, and I thought it was noteworthy that the other people on the panel ignored you, I think perhaps in the hope that nobody would notice. So, but I noticed, and I wanted to appreciate you for really doing a terrific job at that conference. It was an injection of reality that I think was very much necessary. Now, onto the tawdry business of geothermal heat pumps. So I think I agree with you with respect to backup resistance heat and backup natural gas heating. However, let me just ask you this question with respect to pilots. The purpose of a pilot is to really just suss out what the numbers are and what the economic viability of something is. If a decision were made to permit some sort of backup, it would be advisable, would it not be, to require that metrics be reported on how often the backup kicked in and what the segregated cost of the backup was, so that we could have an actual apples to apples comparison of these community geothermal systems versus the alternative. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think if you want to do a backup, I think the backup should be on the pump house, which is a lot less costly. So if there's a concern that So you have boreholes, you have pump houses, you have the lines that are going, and then you have the stuff inside the units. And so I think the most expensive and then the hardest thing to kind of undo is what you put into the units. Whereas
No, but my question is, if we segregated out the cost associated with the backup, that would allow our analysts to figure out what the real cost of the geothermal system is compared to what we have right now. Do you agree with that?
I agree that's a possible direction that you could go in. I think that the reason you would want to put the backup, if you feel concerned about having a system without backup, and whether that's, just to be clear, the way the bill is written, you can't put gas backup in the homes. You could theoretically put gas backup on your pump house, right?
Okay.
Which is not my preference, but you could. You could put electric backup there. You could put gas backup there. So I think that the issue is if you're doing an entire retrofit of a building, I think it's going to be way more expensive to put the resistance backup as well as the entire new systems into the building than it would be to put some kind of backup on a pump house, which may never be used, and I think in the long run is less costly, requires less in the way of retrofit, and could be sort of removed to the extent that it won't be needed. And so I think that you get a better picture of where you're going, and I also think that you potentially could then calculate your grid benefits without sort of upgrading your buildings to be able to, because you'd be talking about, you're going to do some, so this is where I don't know these specific buildings, but right, presumably you have air conditioning in these buildings, and so the load from geothermal itself will be lower in the summer and likely still won't hit the summer peak in the winter, right? Because you still have that like headroom, right? Now you're also adding stoves and a hot water heater, so maybe you go a little bit above what your current summer peak is, right? But if you also are going to build out those buildings, so on top of that, those buildings have enough electricity to also run electric resistance heating. Now the panel upgrades in those buildings is going to have to be really substantial. That is going to be way more expensive than potentially if you put gas or electric backup on a pump house, where you have some upgrades that are sort of needed to make that a reality, but it's not in every single building that you're talking about.
So I guess the answer to my question is, it's not easy to segregate out the cost of the backup because of additional costs like the panel upgrades.
Yeah, I think yes, I think the panel upgrades are significant, and I haven't seen the building by building analyses, but I think I suspect that upgrading every single panel to be able to potentially manage resistance heat is much more than what is going to happen right now, just to add essentially a relatively small load of the stoves and the water heaters, and then expect that the winter summer is kind of close to each other, right? I think that's going to be a much more significant upgrade panel by panel than what the cost would be if you're just putting some kind of backup on your pump house.
I haven't had a chance to reread the bill, which I'd been intending to do, and I will do
It's absolute
tomorrow.
poetry.
What?
It's absolute poetry.
Well, bills I passed really sucked. So, so you mentioned induction cooktops, and you mentioned air source hot water, air source hot water heaters.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Heat pumps.
And in testimony that this commission has heard at other times, it's been told to us that the hot water heaters are substantially more expensive than traditional hot water heaters. And of course, when you talk about induction cooktops, I was pricing them, and they are much more expensive than resistive cooktops, which are clearly not ideal. They're really terrible. So I just wonder if insisting upon a heat pump hot water heater, which is so much more expensive than a traditional electric hot water heater, is if that's something that will just cause the numbers for this whole enterprise to look worse.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that.
So I think it's worth doing some analysis of the impact on the load for the air source hot water heater, right? So you could run numbers in theory, and you could get you could determine. So because again, you're going to have a load impact of that. So the air source hot water heater is more efficient. You potentially have less of an upgrade to the I'm not sure, like without seeing engineering numbers, I couldn't tell you exactly, but so you would have a question of, is the cost of an air source hot water heater, air source heat pump hot water heater, is that cost lower than the overall impact on the grid on the upgrades necessary? I think that's a worthwhile question to ask. On the induction stoves, I think, you're maybe talking about worst case scenario, and like when you and I buy an induction stove, we're looking at like if you're buying just one, right? Like if I buy this or that, and
Yeah,
maybe
there are no
it's
economies of scale.
maybe it's $500 more, right? If we're looking, now you're talking about 200 units, maybe $10,000, right? So when we're talking about a project that maybe reasonably is going to come in at 30 million, 25 million, we'll see, $10,000 to make sure that you have the preferable equipment, I don't think is going to be the thing that's going to make or break it.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to conclude there, except to say that unfortunately I wasn't able to participate yesterday, so I'm going to have to read all the documents and view the public hearing at a future date. But to me, the purpose of these pilots is to be able to slice and dice the numbers afterward. And so I would just hope that whatever we end up with a stream of financial data that allows us to do that by separately segregating out what these cost drivers were. So at the end of the day, it may be that insisting upon this particular electrified strategy versus that may not have been ideal, but certain other components like the actual HVAC component is still might be valid. So I just want to emphasize the fact that we need to have that kind of data transparency in the financials. And
100%.
Again, I want to compliment you for your performance in Philadelphia.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Sussman.
Good afternoon, Delegate Charkoudian. It's nice to see you again.
You too.
I actually participated in her Power in the Park this past Saturday. And it didn't rain, so that was a good thing. So yesterday, the folks from Heat talked about an onion and how geothermal is kind of like an onion, that you peel it back and there are lots of different benefits. There's health benefits, there's efficiency benefits, there's a whole host of benefits. And in thinking about geothermal, I mean, we could do a lot of different things to allow for greater demand response and for greater efficiency. But it seems like the thing that geothermal does that no other technology does is it allows us to not have to build out more gas pipes. That's a significant thing to me, and so that was the thing that's causing my concern in both the BG and the Washington Gas proposals, but also by not addressing that, they're also missing a huge opportunity and a huge benefit to geothermal by not getting rid of the pipes. And that's so I am concerned, and I actually did look at the legislation. So I'm mindful of the opt-out provision, but it just seems to me that allowing the utility to both build out a costly system and at the same time keeping and maintaining the pipes is, we're if we do electrification, we're not going to just keep the existing pipes in place. When you electrify a home, you're going to get rid of whatever the intake pipes are. You're not going to keep them there just in case you decide, well, maybe at some point I'm not going to do electrification. I mean, it just seems to me, if we're going to do this, we're going to do a pilot, but we're going to be investing in so much that for purposes of the pilot participants, they're on geothermal. And so the idea of thinking that we're going to spend, 80 million, 120 million, based on their proposals. And I asked them yesterday, what will happen? Well, I mean, we'll learn things, and then we can decommission, or I don't think we can think, because of the investment that we're doing and because we're doing it to a real community that has real needs. I think we need to go into this assuming that whatever we're going to be doing in terms of a pilot, those folks are going to be doing geothermal, and I think we need to take the pipes out. And if we do that, then we have the benefit of not having to replace those. And so, we actually had a little bit of stride this morning, and there's transmission and there's distribution, and so every year the both utilities are sort of making that investment in replacement, and if we do geothermal, we don't have to replace those, and that's a benefit, and that could be a huge benefit, and so it just seems to me that if we're going to be doing these pilots for the communities, we had the Northwest people yesterday, and none of them seem like they want to stay on gas. The idea that we can give someone an opportunity to opt out and then keep those pipes in place and have to pay for the maintenance on those, it doesn't make sense to me. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are on this.
Thanks. Was it an onion or a cake?
Well, it started out with
sweeter,
started with a cake, but then each layer was the same size, and there are different values to different benefits.
Okay, right.
So
I
then
thought
we
that,
ended up,
Joyce made it a wedding cake.
So then we had a wedding cake, but then somebody raised it. Or maybe in my mind I was thinking an onion.
Okay. Well, onions are good
you
too.
Peel the layers, but and I could keep the cake metaphor if that works.
Did you see my geothermal cake when this bill passed? We had a party with a geothermal cake.
No, I didn't see that.
Well, I'll make another one for you guys
Thank
once
you.
you approve these approve these pilots. Well, I'll get to.
Well, was it a good cake?
It was.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a shock to anyone that it is my vision that we would go to a fully electrified future, and we would not have gas pipes in the ground, and that I actually think that this is a path for those gas companies that want to have a future in maintaining pipes, that this is a way that they could do it. So like that, what you're articulating is very much my vision in the long term. I would say, like, I think there's sort of some technical points, and then there's some bringing people along with us points. I think, when I started by thanking folks, like, I appreciate that vision that I have is not shared by BG&E or Washington Gas. And I think that in some ways it makes them hesitant to think about how they want to participate in this. And I think that, so I think it's worth saying, like, how do we support this project to move forward for folks who don't necessarily have that same belief? Now, you're the Public Service Commission, you tell them what to do, so they'll do what you tell them what to do. Like, that is how this works. I always like to remind folks, we don't need to incentivize, utilities. They are regulated monopolies. You tell them what to do. But I also appreciate that when we're, thinking about the design and going into a neighborhood that's currently served, and this idea of opt-out, I think, was important to a lot of people who do believe in, like, if it's currently available, we're taking it away from folks. I mean, that's kind of how you ended up with the opt-out being in there. But putting the philosophy aside, I think on the technical side of things, I'm not sure that in the short term, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm not sure that in the short term we're actually talking about a difference in cost because, the way the gas pipes work, they're pressurized. Like you don't just pull the pipe. Like if you have a neighborhood here on gas and there on gas and a pipe running through here, if this becomes our network geothermal, we can't just pull this pipe out because like the gas runs through it to get to this neighborhood, right? So you potentially have savings, and this might be a number that you all might ask for in the pipe, to the extent that the gas companies are going to maintain the pipe that goes from the main to the units, to the buildings. If that's getting maintained and, during the 2-year pilot or the 3-year pilot, maybe that has a cost and maybe they don't need to be maintained. And so there's a benefit from that. But I think that the benefits that you're articulating, which I agree with, are more long term, and so I'm not sure that we'd be cutting off a significant portion of the gas system, given the locations of the pilots right now. If you look at the legislation, that was one of the things that I had as criteria. But the reason I wrote the criteria the way that I did is it said, these are the things to consider, recognizing you weren't going to get a neighborhood that had all of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess my thinking was, where the utility has the choice between replacing cast iron that needs to come out, or putting in geothermal. In that situation, you have an avoided cost that can be part of the calculation and could be significant. And so, rather than coming into a neighborhood where the pipes have some additional life to them, in my thinking about this and trying to keep down costs, having geothermal as part of the decisional process. I understand the legislation was pointed out to me can't do anything in terms of new build, but I would like to have geothermal be the option that developers go to when they're doing new build, and I would like to have the situation where the utilities will opt for geothermal when faced with a need to replace pipes, and then the question is, what is that in terms of value to the system? And they can keep being a gas utility, but when faced with having to do pipe replacement, it's geothermal that they go with.
Yeah, I'm 100% with your vision. I think that I would argue that the Public Service Commission could require that analysis when you're looking at STRIDE right now, right? I mean, I think that part of the value of this pilot, which may or may not be exactly what you're describing, but part of the value is we get these in the ground, we start to understand it, we understand what the build out is, we understand cost benefit, we understand how to do it, and then going forward, you might have utilities on their own coming and saying, we're looking at this neighborhood. They might come in and say, new build here, we're working with the builder, we think it should be this. They might come in, you could ask them for that analysis when you're looking at a STRIDE proposal. Like, all of that becomes possible, I think, in a more realistic way. And this gets to like why, I do believe the cost should come down, but I also think there's a value to a somewhat higher cost because all of these other things become possible once we have the data. So I'm with you on your vision. I will say on new build, and maybe MEA mentioned this yesterday, they're running some RFIs right now, trying to understand from builders how we could do more of this it's coming together. I think MEA does their great work, we do this great work. A few years from now, we might be having that conversation about which of the STRIDE proposals ought to be network geothermal instead of,
Okay. Do you see the value of having something in the ground so that we can point to and say it works?
I do, and I think that also, from a residential, right now you have people in Massachusetts who are walking around talking about literally I was Boston Globe maybe, I feel like I won the lottery. People who are on this system talking about they got through the coldest winter in New England for decades on this system, and they're like, I feel like I won the lottery. that public sentiment is also going to be really important. Well, I believe we're going to have that in Maryland, but that kind of public sentiment is going to be really important because the truth is that people's relationship with their utilities are somewhat fraught, and we saw that, with regulator replacement in this city. We know that can be sort of challenging when, utilities are going in saying we're going to do something different, and it's why I think the partnership with the community groups is so important, why that got written into the bill, right? Because now we're not asking a utility to just go in and be like, hey, we're taking out everything you're used to and giving you something else. We think it's great, right? But it's coming from the community. I think after we go through all that, it'll make it just a much more realistic possibility for a stride replacement or for because there's this positive experience with this technology in the state, on a personal and emotional level, in addition to the technical side of it.
Well, I can tell you, yesterday was incredibly impressive to have in the room people who live in this community so engaged and so knowledgeable, and understanding what's possible. So that was very inspiring for me.
Yeah, me too.
So-
They inspire me as well.
Okay, thank you. That's all I
Thanks.
have.
Commissioner McLean.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Just real quick on the cost. I know you indicated that you didn't believe that the initial costs were, I guess, the true costs, so to speak. And none of the 3 projects passed the cost effectiveness test. So assuming the numbers get redone, and the projects still don't pass, that effectiveness test, is there a particular level that you would find acceptable to say, even though the costs outweigh the benefits, these projects should still be approved?
Yeah, well, I think, in theory there is. I can't tell you, the number is point, XYZ, off the top of my head. I think there is, for all the conversation that we've been having about the value to understanding this, including understanding, because right now there's a real question. I'm not sure how much of this data is public, so I probably shouldn't say this, but there's a question about how overbuilt, even the project in Framingham was, right? And they were the first ones, and people are risk averse, and I get that. You don't want to underbuild it and have people freezing, which is why I'm saying the potential solution to that is the backup on the pump house, because then you can take that away once you know you never needed it, right? It's way easier to take that away than to take resistance heat out of a building. So I think, but the other thing I think ultimately, sorry, let me just back up and say it this way. I think ultimately there's a value to this, and I do think that the commission should sort of hold folks' feet to the fire around, let's bring these costs down. Let's work on, and you might end up with something that looks like an iterative set of approvals, right? Asking them to take the next step to get to 30% design, with an understanding that they're going to be reimbursed for the cost to get to the 30% design, but then asking them to take those designs to heat, to have outside experts look at them and say, okay, yeah, that is what you need to do. And then we look at costs and we go, wow, that is really high. Or, oh no, it is possible if we spread the boreholes over a larger surface area, we actually need fewer boreholes than if we put them all in this one parking lot. So let's figure out how to do that, right? All of that sort of thing that becomes possible once you're looking at some level of design. So let's say you do that. You get to 30, you get to 60. As a commission, I think, then can also think about, you can also think about other contingencies that you could approve it with. So another hypothetical is you could build it. We could find out that it's way oversized, right? You could build it. We're like, okay, that's safe. We're risk averse. We're going to overbuild to this percentage right now. But then you could make sure that it is designed so you could bring another 100 units onto it with the same number of boreholes. So I think there's ways to address the cost itself and to bring it down. You still might be looking at a price and you're like, that's just, the cost benefit just doesn't work. But you also, I think, are empowered to look at it and say, these benefits that we've been talking about, let's learn, let's go forward. But I think you also are empowered to do things like say, okay, if this is as overbuilt as it may be, we expect you in 2 years to bring more units onto it. Or, I don't know, so that's the one that comes off the top of my head. So that you're allowing a level of risk averseness, right? Like we're adding caution to it, but with a way to get a financial payback in the future if it turns out we were way more cautious than we needed to be. So I think there's a couple different ways that you all could approach this question of cost benefit, and then the question of, if we want to be cautious, how do we set ourselves up for something else to happen if it turns out we were too cautious?
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, you go ahead. My follow-up.
all right, okay. So, we have two projects pitched to us by BG&E, and there's been some suggestion that we may have to pick between the two. So I'm not going to ask you to do that, but why don't you suggest to us what sorts of things we should consider if we do have to pick between the two of them? What sorts of things should we be looking for to give us the kind of education and information that we need to sort of turn this from a pilot to a permanent thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's this the geek in all of us are like an ice rink. How about that? Because there is this real question about a significant heat shedder that frankly I'm actually really intrigued by, depending on what happens with that. Like, one of the interesting things related to data centers is, they shed a lot of heat, and what if we captured that? And there's a project in somewhere in New York City that's not doing heating and cooling with a network system, but is just taking a data center's waste heat and heating an apartment building nearby, which is kind of wild, right? So there is a value to understanding this sort of technical side of waste heat that I think you get a little bit more with an ice rink than with other buildings. Although you do have differentiated load, I think, in the Baltimore project as well. It's like asking me to pick between my children, really. I think that the things that I would think would be important to look at are environmental justice, right? I think that's kind of a really key piece of this. So I don't know the two neighborhoods as well, so I couldn't say that, but that would be a criteria to look at. And then possibly, I think maybe also asking the questions of what kind of data are we going to get if Washington Gas's project in Northwest Park goes forward, what kind of data do we get from there? And what are the neighborhoods like that would be part of the each of the two BG&E projects? Can we get different kinds of data, right, from them? I think that would be a question. And then I think the third question is, I think that the proposals right now do a decent job of stacking incentives. I think they might be able to do better. And so there is a question about, for example, does Howard County have additional incentives? We were talking in Montgomery County, are there other Montgomery County incentives that we could also add to this that bring the ratepayer cost down? Does Howard County have additional incentives? I think Coppin is part of the Baltimore one. Is there money available? Are there state, and I don't know the answer to this, but is there state money available for efficiency in universities that could bring some of the cost down to the Coppin building? Could that make a difference? Then I think those would be some of the things that you might want to look at.
Okay. And then on the WGL project, they listed the partners that they already had, and then there was a list of potential partners they could add to it, and one of which was a park that apparently is located close by where the project's going to go. And they told us yesterday that they had discussions with the Park and Planning Commission, and it didn't resolve. And I don't know what the issues are, but I guess I just want to make you aware of the fact that, this could be part of that project, but there's some barrier, and maybe there's something you can help them work through with the Park and Planning Commission.
Yes, I only became aware of that yesterday myself, and as soon as I get the details, I'm on it.
Okay, sure. Okay, we appreciate that. So, all right, well, thank you for coming by,
you.
and we're going to do our best. So,
Thank you all.
We have a slight adjustment to our agenda. We are joined today by a constituent from Howard County. We'll call up Britta Hahn. She's with the Howard County Office of Community Sustainability.
and if you could spell your name for our court reporter.
It's Britta, last name Hahn. Thanks for having me. I wanted to start by apologizing for this late entry. Neither BGE nor us knew that we had the chance to comment, but we are excited. I am excited to be here. I have been following yesterday's hearing closely, and I'm aware of the pros and cons that were raised. I'm not going to spend time repeating or belaboring points that have already been discussed, but I do have a few things to add and to stress. So clearly, I'm here to attest that the network geothermal project in Columbia Oakland Mills does have the wholehearted support of the county administration and also by the Howard County Housing Commission and the Columbia Association. And they expressed that in their letters of support in June. Howard County has very ambitious climate goals, not just on paper, and it's taking climate stewardship very seriously, recognizing that novel solutions and technologies are unavoidable in the quest to curb climate change and to do that on a time scale that can avoid major adverse impacts on people's lives, including residents of Howard County. The county administration has expressed their willingness and their commitment to do what they can to clear the path toward a smooth and timely completion of the pilot project in Columbia, Maryland. Howard County is recognizing the incredible potential of geothermal, and in particular network geothermal technologies, in getting the existing building sector off of fossil fuels and decreasing its outsized carbon footprint. To my knowledge, geothermal heat pumps are around 45% more efficient than air source heat pumps. Having network geothermal systems run by entities that are already experienced in running and maintaining a shared network of pipes makes incredible sense. The pilot projects that are being discussed here don't only provide technical data, but they also help develop the rate, metering, and billing systems needed for network geothermal utility, also operations and maintenance. As such, I think these pilot projects are absolutely essential in several ways for this promising new energy solution to mature. It's difficult to judge the reason for the high costs of these pilot projects without a more detailed budget. In their testimony yesterday, HEAT named several examples of things that were learned from similar projects in other parts of the country that can make future projects more cost-effective. These examples included replacing the pump house with an underground box, avoiding excessive backup heat installs, and dividing procurement into 3 separate domains to avoid excessive subcontracting. I believe learning from these present pilot projects will be enhanced if cost savings is a constant and urgent prerogative in the decision-making process at all levels and at this level of detail. But while project details and associated costs deserve scrutiny, I believe there's no question that these pilot projects are of great importance and necessity for tackling the seemingly unmovable carbon footprint of the existing building stock. Howard County will be proud to be part and contribute to the solution. We are grateful to the PSC for its consideration of this proposal and to BGE for developing it in close communication and consultation with Howard County and with other stakeholders. We hope that you will find these projects worthy of the Commission's support, and thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from the Office of People's Counsel. And I'll invite Ms. Hawkins to introduce her panel.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Chairman Hoover. My name is Diamond Hawkins, and I'm Assistant People's Counsel with the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. And I'm joined today by Theodore Love from Green Energy Economics Group, OPC's consultant in this matter, as well as Senior Assistant People's Counsel, Mark Shebist. As others have noted, Maryland's Thermal Energy Network System pilot presents an exciting opportunity for Maryland's gas companies, the Public Service Commission, and interested stakeholders to learn about the use of network geothermal energy, a technology that can provide clean heating and cooling to utility customers and potentially play a significant role in the state's clean energy transition. OPC supports this innovative vision, but cautions that innovation must be balanced with fairness. In this case, that means that the Commission should not approve Washington Gas and BGE's pilots without significant modifications. As our written comments discussed at length, the pilots would impose unreasonably high costs on ratepayers. Our presentation today will place those costs into context for the Commission and summarize OPC's specific recommendations for controlling pilot costs. Some of these recommendations include limiting the total budget cost of each company's Warmth Act pilot to $30 million after all outside funding sources have been reasonably accounted for, limiting recoverable cost overruns to no more than 10% above initially approved budgets unless prior authorization is obtained by the Commission, approving only one BGE pilot project, reducing unjustified operation and maintenance cost, and rejecting BGE's proposal to capitalize non-capital pilot cost and WGL's proposal to depreciate its capital investments on an accelerated basis with the 100 base point on return of equity rider. I will now pass the presentation over to Mr. Love and Mr. Shebist, and we look forward to answering any questions that the Commission may have after the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Next slide, please. As Diamond mentioned, my name is Theodore Love. I am the president of Green Energy Economics Group, and I've been helping OPC out with their comments on this. We have experience in decarbonization, energy efficiency, renewables, and also helped out the Massachusetts Attorney General's office with their review of the Eversource pilot project. Next slide, please. So, we've been talking about these pilot projects for the full last few days here, so I'm not going to go in depth on what they are, but I think I do want to point out, next slide please, the budgets that we're talking about here. So currently the budgets are being projected at $123 million for all of the pilots combined, up to $190 million if there is no additional funding from outside sources. This is a significant budget, as we've all talked about, but I would also like to point, next slide please, point out that it's not the only costs that are being asked of ratepayers. In fact, the revenue requirements for these pilot projects are significantly higher. When looking at the different scenarios provided by the utilities in their filings, we see that costs range from about $261 million to $353 million in real 2025 dollar terms. And this is after any of the participant revenue is accounted for here. So we're not just talking about $125 million here, we're talking potentially about significantly more money being asked of ratepayers here. So let's put some of those costs in context here a little more. Next slide, please. And yes, thank you. So I wanted to just do a quick comparison here between these pilot projects and some of the fully established programs in Maryland. As you can see, the IRA program has a funding level of $136 million, which is about what the TENS pilot projects are projected for after outside funding is utilized. In addition, I've also shown BG's 2024 Empower spending, which is showing that BGE's projection for $130 million in costs is about 70% of their 2024 budget for Empower. So just generally speaking, we're talking about pilot budgets that are extremely large compared to existing projects and programs already. Next slide, please. We would generally characterize that these budgets are beyond the pilot level here. And in fact, MEA has some other decarbonization programs that are significantly cheaper. Our comments in the appendices to this presentation include a full list, but most of them are less than $20 million, and there's only one that's close at about $64 million. Next slide, please. I also want to bring in some context from New York. New York has another utility thermal energy network system pilot program that's currently going on. As we can see here, it is, I would say, spiraled upwards in cost from their original filings here. When the New York pilots were initially proposed in December of 2023, they had an average cost of $25 million. By June of 2025, those costs had gone up to $71 million on average. And since we filed our comments, those costs have gone up again. Now they're looking at around $97 million per project as of September of this year. That's total cost of almost $1 billion in New York right now. And the average budgets have risen, as we can see, about 3.9 times what their original filings were. And this is even after 4 projects were withdrawn since the initial filing. Next slide, please. So I also want to put some other context here. We've talked a lot about overall costs in this filing so far, in this hearing so far. But it's important to put them in a relative term here. So what we tried to do here is show what the overall pilot projects would cost on a dollar per ton basis, and that is per ton of heating and cooling capacity. So basically saying, how much is it costing to serve the end use customer here on a relative basis? So you can see the 2 blue bar there show the median and average cost that we found for existing and projected cost per ton for geothermal network systems in the United States. On average, we are seeing about $65,000 a ton, with a median cost of $58,000. And this does include some of those New York pilot project projections as well, I might add. As we can see, the Washington Gas BG&E pilot have costs that are significantly higher per ton, approximately $134,000 for the WGL's pilot project, and up to $223,000 per ton for BG&E. We've also highlighted here the Framingham, Massachusetts project that we've discussed a lot as well in this hearing so far. That had about a $78,000 per ton cost there, so still well below the projected costs for the Maryland pilots here. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit more about the Framingham project here because it's the most relevant project to look at, given that it is recently constructed and has a similar design to the proposed pilots here in Maryland. As we can see, it has about 24 residential buildings, 5 commercial buildings for about 125 customer accounts. This does include some multifamily buildings and single-family buildings. It's an ambient temperature geothermal network loop, similar to the Maryland proposals. But it also had costs that increased significantly from their initial proposal. They went from about $12.5 million in 2019 to now currently sitting at around $27 million. Of that $27 million, ratepayers will probably be spending about $19.5 million. I think that also shows the large amount of tax credits that are available. I think about $7.1 million of that is from the Section 48 investment tax credit. I would also like to point out that the Eversource Framingham project cost recovery is through a reconciliation account that includes no return on capital. And ultimately, this project is now complete, I believe, as of this year. It was kind of some phased construction, but I think everything is completed now. And as we heard from Representative Charkoudian, there are some great responses from people who are participating in the pilot there. Next slide, please. So we also heard from HEAT about how we need to slice the data a little bit more. So this is our attempt to do that. It's a little bit different than the approach that he recommended. For example, we have included both the bore field and the loop system itself in that thermal network front of meter section there. But we also have separated out the building upgrade side, as well as the planning, development, and engineering costs, and then other O&M and other costs here. So this is a comparison of the Eversource project to the WGL and BGE pilots here. As you can see, the planning and development and engineering costs are similar, around $3 to $5 million. But these other costs are either much higher on an absolute basis or similar in the case of the BGE Coppin State front of meter costs. We think it's worth at least pointing out here how much higher the O&M and other costs are for the BG&E projects compared to the Eversource project here. We're talking, over $17 million compared to about $2.5 million. So we're going to do another levelized cost look, or more relative cost look for the two big components here. Next slide. First, I wanted to take a look at the thermal network cost per ton. So this is the cost of the bore fields, the loop itself, the pumps, the pump house, all the stuff that would be in front of the meter as part of this thermal network. And as you can see, the cost projections for these pilots are not that far off from what Framingham saw on a per ton basis here. Remember, per ton being the amount of heating and cooling that is being served. And I think that goes to show that there has been a lot of learning done at the construction phase of these portions. Both of the utilities retained CDM Smith, who was involved with the Framingham project and is involved with many of the New York projects as well. So I think this does show that some of these front of the meter costs are not too far off from the real world example here. Next slide, please. But then I think the big challenge here is the behind the meter costs. So this is, again, the cost to upgrade the building, put in the ground source heat pumps within the building, and then also some of the electric appliances needed to get these buildings completely off of natural gas. So that is a key distinction to make between the Eversource pilot project and these Maryland projects here. The Eversource project did not require full electrification, so there was no requirement to buy these additional equipment here. And we did hear that from the utilities. That is one of the big distinctions that they wanted to be made. However, I will point out, I was able to dig into BG&E's numbers a little bit last night, and I pulled out what the electric appliance portion of those costs are. So just to give some context here, it looks like Coppin State has about a net cost of about $800,000 for their electric appliances compared to $26.5 million for the ground source heat pumps. So in the Coppin State example, it's not a very large portion of those costs. That mainly is the ground source heat pumps and other upgrades required there. On the Columbia site, it's a little bit larger. It's about $6.1 million for the electric appliances, compared to $21 million for the ground source heat pumps. So still, it's much larger, but it's still a smaller portion of the overall costs here. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up because, as we'll talk about in our cost control section here, I think that there are opportunities to bring these costs down. Next slide, please. So I just want to bring us back a little bit here and just emphasize that there is strong support for geothermal as a promising technology, and that we have to recognize the value of learning from these opportunities here. But the cost concerns are significant, and we have some very specific recommendations on how we hope those costs can both come down and hopefully not spiral out of control in the future. Next slide. So the first recommendation here is on reducing operation and maintenance, and other costs here. As we said previously, on the BG&E costs were much higher than both WGL and the Eversource project here. We saw a few areas we were concerned around, including the significant amount of full-time employees that they are assigned to this project at 6, which is about $2 million in annual costs that they project for the 70-year lifetime of the project. We also talked briefly yesterday about the union's role in this pilot, and I believe that BG&E has added a $1.5 million line item for BU shadowing, which would be the union shadowing, that might be duplicative over some of the construction costs. And then there's some unexplained fees like this 1.5% capital augmentation fee that BG&E include. For WGL, I would also like to point out they do have significant O&M, which is $2.5 million a year, 1.1 of which is property tax, and the rest is fixed and variable O&M. Again, that would also be for the lifetime of the pilot. And this is all in comparison, for example, for WGL, they have about $50,000 per year in participant revenue here. So I think that part of my concerns with the O&M piece here is the long-term sustainability of a project like this. When you are only taking in around $50,000 from participants, but have overhead costs that are $2.5 million, that doesn't necessarily make it a long-term sustainable proposition. Next slide, please. So the other thing that Heat mentioned was that, and as we saw with the large cost per ton, the behind-the-meter costs here are a challenge. That we're addressing a building stock that is being retrofitted, and so we are hoping that there are ways that these costs can be reduced. One of the ways that we identified was BG&E's assumptions for ground source heat pumps. They inflated the direct cost of those ground source heat pumps in their projections by 2.4 times to get the full cost there. And I would just note that similar factor was used for the air source heat pumps in their benefit cost analysis, and was called the loading rate. I'd also point out that, even though it is preliminary, WGL's cost estimates did include 10% contractor overhead and 20% contingency. Next slide, please. So another way to bring down the ratepayer contribution to the behind-the-meter costs are to explore cost contributions from the owner of the buildings that are being upgraded here. I point out that the Warmth Act does not preclude the utilities from exploring this option here, and I do understand that it does need to be explored with caution. However, there are significant amounts of capital improvements that are being contemplated here. $26.6 million for the WGL pilot and $57.8 million for the BGE pilots. These are direct monetary assistance, essentially, to the owners of these buildings for improving their HVAC systems and avoiding the cost for them to install or upgrade their HVAC, 15, 20 years down the road. So we believe that it is a reasonable ask to explore a way for the owners to contribute some of these capital costs here. Next slide, please. So now to go on to a specific recommendation for one of the pilots here. This is the WGL pilot site here as you can see from the picture, there is a main loop that goes around the Northwest Apartments complex over there. And then there is another section marked on this as Section A and Section B that shoots off to go to these 10 single-family homes. So these 10 single-family homes only represent about 4% of the load that was being served here, but it's 30% of the loop length. It is expensive to put this pipe in the ground, and, as part of an initial pilot here, it might not necessarily be worth serving just these 10 homes with that length of pipe. using the detailed cost projections, from WGL, we did project that it would save around $3.5 million to remove these single-family homes from the pilot effort, which is approximately $350,000 per home to serve those customers. I would also point out that WGL mentioned they had not even reached out yet to the single-family homes. So I think that we still have an opportunity here to influence the direction of this pilot. There's also additional learning opportunities here, including the connection with the Joanne Lelec Elementary School. They have a current geothermal system under development. This would be an extremely interesting learning experience in terms of figuring out the protocol for getting another system onto an existing system, and figuring out how to communicate between a utility-owned system and another private system. So that is our recommendations on the WGL pilot. Next slide, please. For BG&E, we actually do recommend that you pursue only one pilot at this time. Some of the questions were earlier about which pilot should you choose. And we feel that the Columbia site is the clear answer here. I think that the difference between the Columbia and Coppin State site from a cost-benefit perspective is not that great. They both have similar BCRs here. But the Columbia site offers some additional learning opportunities around this ice skating rink as a unique feature. It also has a much lower cost per ton to serve these customers here, and a more diverse building mix with both residential and commercial buildings. And I would also like to point out it is at the end of the gas line, which offers an opportunity to examine as a non-pipe alternative. If the pilot is successful, you could potentially cap the gas line there and avoid that future cost there. Next slide, please. Similarly, we recommend maximizing outside funding opportunities. I think we've all heard how the investment tax credit is still in force, and it should be in force for the perceived the construction window of the potential pilots, and that is a significant amount of money, up to 40% of the pilot costs for front of the meter equipment. Similarly, there's Inflation Reduction Act funds. And I believe that there's some other MEA funds that have been discussed and should be pursued, especially those that can reduce those behind-the-meter costs for ratepayers and ultimately reduce the costs of the project itself. I'd also point out that both pilot projects are pursuing would pursue geothermal renewable energy credits, and that they had very different valuation assumptions for them. Considering that every $1 million counts here, we just want to make sure that that they are valuing their GRECs at the maximum amount possible here. So just a comment there. Next slide, please. So ultimately, we really would like to limit these pilot budgets to $30 million per utility for ratepayer funding after outside funding has been reasonably accounted for. As we mentioned in this previous slide, there's a significant amount of outside funding available, and that this should be feasible given that this would still be about 50% more than the ratepayers were asked to fund in Framingham. Next slide, please. In addition, as a way to limit the real risk of costs spiraling out of control, we recommend that no more than 10% of the approved budget, over the approved budget, can be spent without prior authorization from the Commission. And we believe this is similar to the Commission's decision in Order Number 89664 in the Energy Storage Pilot Program. Next slide, please. So I want to now just talk a little bit more about the learning opportunities. As we saw, there's a lot of recommendations here on cutting costs, but there's also important learning here that needs to happen if we are to do these pilots. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is weatherization. There have been efforts to weatherize some of these buildings in these pilots, but I want to make sure that they are all weatherized as part of these as part of these pilots. That lowers the thermal load. That reduces the cost for the ground source heat pumps. It reduces the number of bore fields that would be needed. And it also helps with understanding how to properly size this equipment and the loop itself. We've also recommended the exploration of the use of D-superheaters. This is a technology that uses the waste heat from the cooling cycle to heat water for domestic hot water usage. Considering that these pilots are trying to fully get these customers off of the gas system, this would be an opportunity to examine some novel approaches to making the most efficient option possible for serving the customer end usage here. Then the specific recommendations we had before about exploring interconnection with the Joanne Lilac Elementary School hold, as well as if BG&E does pursue the Coppin State site, looking more closely at that solar thermal injection to help balance the load and potentially reduce costs. Next slide, please. All right, so I would like to talk a little bit more now about the benefit cost analysis that was done by both of the utilities here. What's interesting is that they both took two different approaches. BG&E used what they called their unified benefit cost analysis approach, and WGL used the modified jurisdictional cost test as well as the utility cost test. WGL used these frameworks that are much more familiar and a part of the Empower programs right now. And BGE is using the Unified Benefit Cost Analysis approach, which is currently being worked on here in Maryland, but is not yet finalized. As you can see here, the results for these two tests are also very different. But I would also like to point out a large difference in these results is because BG&E used a different counterfactual of air source heat pumps being the baseline, where WGL used a more business as usual continued gas usage as the baseline here. When we look at BGE's unified benefit cost analysis approach, we can see that it's comparing the impact of the ground source heat pumps here in the blue bars against the impacts of the air source heat pumps, offsetting it in the red bars. So that's the cost to install them and run these equipment against the cost to install and run air source heat pumps here. And next slide. WGL instead utilized the MJST, which they looked at the cost to install the equipment against, in the UCT example here, just the gas system benefits. But when looking at the MJST, they could look at the electric perspective as well as incorporating CO2 benefits. We think that in this instance, the UCT is not particularly helpful just because it ignores some of the big benefits of geothermal, especially in this fuel switching scenario, of the electric system and CO2 benefits here. I would also like to point out that WGL utilized the values from the Empower program for their avoided costs here, in particular for T&D on the electric system, while BG&E actually used, I believe, their avoided costs from their last rate case for T&D, which are significantly higher. Next slide, please. So we think that there's a number of challenges with this current benefit cost analysis framework. I think one of the main questions here is what is the appropriate baseline? Given the Warmth Act's directive to compare against air source heat pumps for the benefits to the electric system, I think it's a pretty clear question, a pretty clear answer that air source heat pumps should be examined as the baseline in context here, because we are talking about electrifying, and the air source heat pumps are generally considered the lowest cost option to electrify. The other question here is the treatment of the utility's rate of return. In my review of the benefit cost analysis done by the two utilities, I did not find the utilities rate of return was included in either of these tests. I believe BG&E mentioned that it was included yesterday, and my analysis found that it wasn't. And it's usually not included, I've seen, in MJST either. This is an open question, and one that I think should be examined, in particular at the Unified Benefit Cost Analysis Working Group. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one at this point. But again, the Unified Benefit Cost Analysis is still being developed here. So one of the things that we heard yesterday was about the concerns of the residents of the Northwest Park Apartments around environmental, public health, and dignity. These are all benefits that are real, but are not currently being counted in the Unified Benefit Cost Analysis approach yet. And we would encourage BG&E to at least work towards trying to quantify some of those benefits in their test. Next slide, please. So ultimately, our recommendations for benefit cost analysis relate to including air source heat pumps as the baseline, so asking WGL to provide analysis showing what their cost effectiveness analysis would look like with air source heat pumps as the baseline. And then we have some recommendations around BG&E reducing some of their cost assumptions, in particular for the air source heat pumps. And also showing an example where the gas system is business as usual, similar to what WGL showed in their analysis. Next slide, please. Now I also want to talk a little bit about participant rate design here before turning it over to Mark. The Warmth Act requires that participants do not pay any more in the geothermal pilot than they would have otherwise for their utilities bill. That includes gas and electric. We found that BG&E did not include the electric impacts in their analysis of calculating the participant rates. But WGL did, and we recommend that BG&E does include those electric impacts when doing so. Next slide. And next, I will turn it over to Mark to talk about the cost recovery for non-participants.
Thanks, Dale. Good afternoon, Chairman Hoover and Commissioners. Mark Shebus for Office of People's Counsel. There was extensive discussion of the utilities cost recovery proposals yesterday, but to refresh the record, and Commissioner Barbe, since you weren't able to be here, I'll briefly summarize those first. BGE has proposed to recover its capital expenditures essentially in the normal manner by seeking to move them into rate base in subsequent rate cases. It's proposed to defer its non-capital expenditures to a regulatory asset that would be moved also into rate base in rate cases, and then amortized over 5 years at the company's authorized rate of return. And BGE is proposing to recover costs from its electric customers rather than from its gas customers. Washington Gas, on the other hand, has proposed to recover all of its pilot expenditures over an accelerated period, about 2 years, which means accelerated depreciation for its capital expenditures, and has also proposed a 100 basis point adder to its current ROE, so that it would be at 10.5% for its capital expenditures. OPC in its comments has asked that the Commission reject both of these proposals and adopt a common alternative for both utilities. Namely, for capital investments, we support BGE's approach, basically treat capital expenditures as they normally are. Utilities will have an opportunity in rate cases to move those investments into their rate base. Regarding non-capital expenditures, we think the utilities should be directed to expense those rather than, and again, this specifically goes to BGE, to expense those rather than being allowed to move them into regulatory assets, which are subsequently moved into rate base. And we ask that the Commission direct BGE to recover all of its costs, assuming a pilot is approved, from gas customers rather than from electric customers. I'm going to start with that last issue because I think it's the simplest. The obligation, the statutory obligation here is on gas companies, not on electric companies. The fact that BGE happens to be a conjoined gas and electric company doesn't change that fact. The relevant statute is Section 71102A, clearly imposes the obligations on gas companies rather than on electric companies. If we accept BGE's logic here, Washington Gas would need to have an opportunity to recover costs from Pepco's customers, which clearly is not something that the Commission can authorize. Related to that fact is that the reason that BGE has given for recovering from electric customers is highly speculative at this point. We don't know if there will be any T&D investments avoided. Likely there will be. We don't know what their amount will be. And as Mr. Love just noted, BGE's projected T&D, and for the record, transmission and distribution investments, we think the values that they're using are inflated. But those factual issues aside, we really think this is a legal issue. The Commission simply does not have the authority to approve recovery from electric customers, even assuming that there are some cost causation arguments there. With respect to the capitalization of non-capital expenditures, Commission should adopt OPC's approach and reject capitalization because it would lower the cost of BGE's pilot, and there's really no legitimate reason for capitalization in this case. There might be slightly lower bill impacts in the short term, but the overall cost of the projects will be higher if BGE is allowed to earn its authorized return on non-capital expenditures. BGE has stated that it can't support a pilot without being allowed to defer expenditures to a regulatory asset and move them into rate base, and that is the Commission's traditional approach. We agree with Delegate Charkoudian that the Commission will tell BGE what to do. If the Commission denies the opportunity to defer to regulatory assets, BGE has to comply with that directive. And with respect to the idea that this is a sort of time-tested Commission approach, well, it's true that the Commission has approved this approach in some instances. For instance, the electric vehicle pilot. It's also true that that initial decision was made in 2019 before the Commission's decision to eliminate this kind of treatment of non-capital expenditures in the Empower program. And another, I think, key distinction between this pilot project and the EV pilot project program is that this is much more capital intensive. So there will be plenty of opportunities, assuming the Commission approves at least one project here, for companies to earn a return through their capital investments. With respect to Washington Gas's proposal, and this is item 2 here, really it should say both accelerated recovery and also the addition of the 100 basis point adder, sort of captured both in that point. Commission should reject this. We heard yesterday, and it's part of Washington Gas's own presentation, that it would impose average cost of $5 to $8 per month on the bill of a residential customers. That's very high. And also, I think what came out in yesterday's discussion, I think this is an exchange between the company and Commissioner Linton, is that effectively it would enable the company to evade any kind of prudence review for these capital investments. These would all, assuming that they don't file a rate case during the period that this is going on, they will just recover all their capital investments over 2 years with accelerated depreciation, including, I think the company has said, decommissioning costs. That's a pretty extraordinary request from the Commission, and allowing the company to evade prudence review for these sorts of investments we think is just doesn't make any sense. With respect to the request for the higher ROE, the discussion yesterday was informative on that as well. I think the company was asked, well, what difference will it make to the pilot projects? And the answer was essentially none, that it might incentivize the company to further explore innovation in this area. But I think Commissioner Suchman, you had an exchange with a company that revealed that they haven't really done that yet, at least with respect to sort of new construction. And the other, excuse me, the other point with respect to Washington Gas's proposal is that it is inconsistent with the way that the commission is to evaluate these projects after the 2-year operations period has passed. I'm going to read from section 71102D21 of the statute. Once the 2-year period of this subsection, under paragraph 1 of this subsection has passed, the commission, in consultation with the administration, the Office of People's Counsel, the electric, gas, or water company that owns and manages the pilot system, a certified representative, the employees of the electric company, gas company, or water company that owns and manages the system, and participating customers shall determine whether to make the pilot system permanent. So the decision about whether these projects will extend beyond the initial 2-year period is an open question. There's a process the statute prescribes for dealing with that situation, and the effect of Washington Gas's proposal is to say, well, we should recover all of our costs, even though these capital investments may be around for a much longer period, in which case it would obviously be appropriate to depreciate them over the longer period. And the other sort of piece of that, the other pieces of that statute that I think are relevant is that if a determination is made that a pilot system will not be made permanent, the commission may approve recovery of all prudently incurred costs necessary for a gas company to comply with that determination, and that the commission has to adopt, excuse me, regulations on this point. All that being to say, like, there is a place for potential discussions on accelerated depreciation in the event that these pilots are not made permanent at the conclusion of the 2-year period. But that's a discussion that is premature, and therefore Washington Gas's proposal for accelerated depreciation is also premature in this case. That ends our formal presentation. We thank the Commission for its attention, and we are happy to answer the Commission's questions.
Mr. Schlesman.
Right, got to get my questions in before 2:30, and then I turn into a pumpkin, Jewish pumpkin. In terms of cost recovery, for the non-capital costs, you want it just to be treated just as O&M, so it's just expensed, and so that's okay. And would that be the case for WGL as well? So you'd want to create a regulatory asset for the capital costs, and for non-capital, it would just be expensed?
That's correct.
Okay. Now there's a lot of recommendations that you're proposing here. Have you thought about sort of next steps of how the projects could be massaged in a way to bring down costs and to reflect? Are you looking for specific direction from us to do this? Because there are a lot of different pieces in this, and so what is your thinking about what's the most efficient way for us to make this happen?
Well, and I think Mr. Love can speak to this as well. We've tried to, like, in the cost control section of our presentation, to those are our leading ideas for how to control costs, together with modifying the cost recovery proposals to bring down costs. I don't know that we have explored many other ideas beyond the specifics, like the removal of the 10 single-family homes from Washington Gas's project, the keeping BGE's pilot to a single project.
Well, I'm more concerned about, the cost differential in O&M, for example, between what's being proposed and the Massachusetts project. So those are sort of areas. I'm not sure we can get into the details because we don't have the details. And so what do you think is the sort of most effective way for us to communicate, bring those O&M costs down? And I'm without knowing what they are. We can issue an order, but it's, would it be most effective for us to ask the parties to get together and try to figure out, this is, in order to have a really good pilot, we'd like to have the stakeholders engaged as much as possible. Would that be something that would be helpful in trying to get this pilot off the ground, assuming we approve the pilots?
I think it could be. I will turn it over to Mr. Love
Sure.
for more specific thoughts on that.
Yeah, so to speculate here a little bit on an approach that might make sense, I think a little more of a collaborative approach to reaching a modified proposal, I think, would need to happen. Having some additional discussions on ways to reduce specific costs in the current proposal would be a great first step. But ultimately, I think it would be very helpful to have a revised proposal that addresses at least some of these concerns that we've brought up here. If there's a way to include the parties in that and the commenters here, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, it might just have to be the utility.
Well, I'll tell you, my concern is the battery storage pilot and the challenges that we encountered in that, and this is infinitely more complicated, and so I'm just sort of thinking about an efficient way of making sure that we can get a pilot that's off the ground rather than having folks come in next year because of a variety of different issues in play. And I really was sort of struck by the chart of the cost differential between the proposals we're seeing today and the Massachusetts proposal. And so I'm a little bit worried about kind of going in with numbers that are this high, having not a lot of, I'm having concern, and trying to find a way to avoid the kinds of problems that we could encounter if everybody's kind of all over the place in terms of where they think the pilot should be going, and so, sort of having the utility go off and do its thing, I think, is making me a little bit worried. I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can have the parties kind of get together, not really a work group, but a way in which we can sort of massage some of these challenges.
Yeah, OPC would be happy to participate in that. Again, our starting point going into those conversations would be the sort of having an initial limit on the budgets.
Right.
30 million is our proposal, combined with the need for companies to come in to the commission to seek approval if they're going to exceed their budgets by more than 10%. And the reference to the energy store pilot order that we had there is slightly different. I believe that one of the utilities had included in its budget a 50% contingency, and I think the commission's directive was, or a certain contingency, but I think the commission's directive was, if you're going to exceed that contingency amount or go up to half of that or more than half, you need to come in and talk to us first and get specific approval.
Well, I'm mostly thinking about the fact that it was a failure. So that's a concern of mine. But also, I mean, if we're hearing from the utilities that they can't possibly do a pilot with a $30 million cap, and you're asking for a $30 million cap, I'm just thinking that there has to be a way to kind of have the conversation, because if we did a cap and their response is it can't be done, then we're going to have some additional conversations that I think if we could find a way to avoid, would be sort of the best way of going forward on this. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Barbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Love, I think the most useful metric that you presented to us was the cost per ton. So, here's my question, and I don't know how much analysis your firm has done in this area, but how does the Massachusetts Eversource cost per ton compared to the cost per ton for a plain vanilla geothermal system that you would put into an individual home?
So without giving you an exact number here, I think that the cost per ton for geothermal I've seen range from around $20,000 to $40,000. There's obviously a lot of range of difference there,
Sure.
but yeah, from 20 to 40,000, I would say.
And what was it
Reasonable.
for the Massachusetts program?
About $78,000 per ton. And I think that there is something worth mentioning here, which is that these are the first costs for these systems too, right? There was a significant amount of discussion yesterday around how that first cost is a lot higher than what subsequent costs would be. So I would expect that you can go to the one before that one, actually. Sorry, one more. One more. There we go. Yes, $78,000 per ton there.
Compared to how much for an individual home?
Not for a home, but on a per ton basis, you're looking at probably $20,000 to $40,000 on a per home basis.
Well, I have many friends who
Yeah.
have geothermal.
Yeah.
Some of them might have been the sponsor of this bill.
Well, you also have to remember that this includes weatherization as well. So there is some cost for weatherization there. So it's kind of a little more of a comprehensive project.
Well, but my friends who had installed geothermal also either had good weatherization up front, which was paid for, or also paid for weatherization. So it's not so different. But so basically, I understand. Look, I'm an accountant. I understand that the first time you build something, it's going to be expensive. I understand that, but this looks like it's 2.5 times as expensive. I mean, that's quite a hill to climb for cost containment. You know, okay. I think you answered my question. Thank you.
I would agree. It is an expensive proposition right now on a cost per ton basis.
Well, hold on. I mean, we had one contractor come in here and make a bold claim that air source hot water heaters are substantially more expensive than traditional, and that he'd never expected for them to come down in price. And I didn't agree with that. They're obviously going to come down in price. The question is, will they come down by a factor of 2.5?
Mm-hmm.
And that, we've seen that with photovoltaics. We've seen that with transistors, but photovoltaics and transistors are something that are popped out of a factory at utility, at massive scale. I mean, this is never going to be something that's done at utility at that kind of scale, because every project has to be bespoke. They're all like a fingerprint,
So I would agree with you that we wouldn't see a dramatic decrease in the cost similar to what we saw on solar photovoltaic. I will point out, actually, can you go to the next slide where it compares the cost per ton for, one more please. So yeah, when we look here, this is that cost per ton in front of the meter, so the loop and all that
right.
information there. One of the things that he'd also pointed out yesterday was that this is where you can get some savings when you do the next project here, because you already have some of the loop in, and you might have extra capacity in your boreholes here. So this cost per ton portion of that could be lowered potentially significantly. But then again, the next slide, when you look at the behind the meter costs that are still going to be,
Well, that leads to the next question I was going to ask. I mean, as an economic proposition, when I was in the legislature, there was no shortage of bills to have us retrofit apartment buildings, and I think I passed 0 of them, because to me the word retrofit is an standard English language translation of retrofit is expensive as hell. And I'm not. So has anybody done? I know EverSource was a retrofit, and it is a lot cheaper. And kudos to them for that. Are there any is there any analysis on brand new builds? Because to me, that would make a lot of sense economically.
Unfortunately, I don't have the access to the data that HEAT does, but I will say that there are some new builds. In particular, there is a project in Austin, Texas that was, I believe, 2,000 single-family homes that were put onto a network geothermal system as a new construction.
As a new construction.
And that was privately developed, too, I believe. So there are real...
Any way for us to get the numbers on that?
You know, we can ask.
Okay. Well,
But yeah, I think that is an example of the private sector doing the math to a certain degree and it penciling out, especially on new construction.
and in Austin, Texas, of all
And in
places.
Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Blaine.
Good afternoon. On the transmission and distribution savings, staff had proposed to capture those savings and, I guess, have the electric customers pay for those, so to speak. Is OPC opposed to that, provided, those benefits can be verified?
Commissioner McLean, we do oppose that just because it's fewer costs on electric customers, obviously, than BGE's proposal. But again, it has the same statutory problem.
Okay.
We simply think the statute imposes the obligation here on the gas company, and therefore costs must be recovered from gas customers.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of BGE, you wanted them to expense their O&M, correct? How would they recover that given their multi-year rate plan and the reconciliation and the lack of reconciliation now?
Well, we think it could be done through a rider in the same form as, or similarly to the way that Empower expenses are recovered. One downside to that is that, the Empower rider, it fully reflects the costs that the company is spending. Here, you would have a rider that, whatever says network geothermal, that doesn't include all the costs because there would be capital costs that the companies would be seeking to move into rate base. So in that sense, it's not a perfect mechanism, but we think the upside exceeds the downside.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Mr. Love, in terms of the Eversource project,
Yeah.
and those costs from budgets from 10 or 12 million up to almost 30, what were the main drivers, if you know, sir?
Well, it's hard to say exactly, but one of the main drivers was an increase in the cost to construct the loop and do the drilling. I will say that the initial budgets were developed 5 years ago, and there have been significant improvements in learning around what these costs could be since then. And I think that the Maryland projects are starting at a better place here. But then there's other challenges that you experience as a network geothermal. Part of the network is that you have to bring in a network of buildings. So I believe that the buildings that were originally planned to be included shifted around a bit during the ultimate construction of the project, and I think they brought in a larger commercial building at one point as part of that increase as well.
Right. It's probably same or similar issues in New York.
It's hard to tell. New York provides, I believe, it's quarterly updates on the progress here. But they don't provide that much detail on what has changed in those quarterly updates. That's public. I am not a party in those proceedings, so I have not been able to dive any deeper into those. But I think there are similar challenges there. The mix of buildings that they can serve has shifted for some of those projects. The sites are changing for some of those projects, and construction costs probably have been increasing significantly as well.
Okay, thank you, sir. Finally, on your $30 million cap, just to clarify, that's a figure that OPC believes is reasonable to construct these projects, not necessarily looking at, all right, BG and WGL gave us, these budgets. We think we can get all these savings. They overestimated or they're inflated for some reason, and we think they can get the 30 easily.
We think that that is a reasonable number, and I would point out that's 30 million after other costs are accounted for, other funding is accounted for, which is significant. I think this is really talking about a pilot that probably have a top line budget of more like 45 million, depending on what other funding is available.
All right, thank you, sir.
And Commissioner Klein, can I just clarify, the 30 million cap or limit, we're not saying that that is a hard limit on what the utilities could recover. We acknowledge that things, unanticipated events like COVID, like a war in Ukraine, could cause costs to increase in certain respects. But 30 million we think is a reasonable amount for an initial budget, subject to modification with the other checks that we've recommended.
Understood. Thank you.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank Delegate Charkoudian for being here today. I had to step out, so I wasn't able to hear the remainder of your presentation, but I'll catch it on YouTube. And same thing with the People's Council. I did not catch your presentation either, so I'll have some evening videos to watch. But I did have a question for you, picking up on the question that Commissioner McLean just asked regarding the $30 million cap. You also included a 10% overage limit or cap. I asked the question about that to the utility companies, and of course they expressed some concern about that. They were opposed to it first, but more importantly, they suggested that if there was some challenge regarding funding, that they would come in and make it a point of raising those issues with the commission before it became a major issue. Almost as if they had an internal line that would be, if they approach it, they would say something to us. You obviously had the opportunity to hear that. My summary was a bit rough around the edges, but that's basically what it was. What is your response to that?
Well, we were there, and I think you accurately captured the dialogue between you and the companies. We think that dialogue makes our case, essentially, for a process and a requirement for the utilities to come in and seek approval from the commission before it has significant cost overruns. If they have an internal process and are intending to do that anyway, there shouldn't be a reason to object to the commission requiring it.
All right. There were other questions I thought I would have, but I didn't see your presentation, so I'm not going to ask them and put everybody through that here. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so on this issue of the cap, was there a cap on the Massachusetts project?
There was not.
Okay. And I've heard your discussion about how you arrived at the $30 million number, but I guess what I want to find out is, do you think it's more important that we have some sort of cap, or are you particularly wedded to 30 as the cap?
I think some sort of limit is more important personally. I mean, I'll have to let OPC speak for them.
Yeah, Chairman Hoover, I think that number is our best estimate of what a reasonable amount could be if the commission were to direct the sort of post-hearing conversations that Commissioner Suchman brought up. We're not saying that we couldn't be persuaded that a different number might be appropriate. But based on the data that we've reviewed so far and our analysis of other comparable projects, we think a $30 million initial budget should be feasible.
But I guess the question I have related to that, though, is do we run the risk of, if we set a cap, artificial cap, do we run the risk of getting a project that simply doesn't work? I mean, the utility said yesterday, look, $30 billion just won't cut it. We can't do it for that price. So I'm concerned that if we try to guess today what the cap ought to be, are we setting ourselves up for failure because it simply isn't enough money?
It's a legitimate question, and I think Heat raised that as well as the utilities. In fairness, they mentioned that with a certain scale, you are able to get more learnings. So, again, I think we are not necessarily wedded to that $30 million figure, but, in criticizing it, we also have not heard the utilities propose an alternative. We think, again, to echo Mr. Love, that there should be some sort of limit, and we'd be happy to hear what the utilities might counter-propose.
And so on the process for approving cost overruns, same initial question. Does the Massachusetts project have that kind of provision?
It does not. No.
Okay. And do you have in mind sort of what the process would be? Because I guess my concern on this is that we not become a delaying mechanism, because if they have to go through a process of getting approval from us for any sort of cost overruns, it slows the train down, quite honestly, because it takes us a while to sort of process these things, because it has to obviously go out to various parties, including you, for you to make comments on it. I mean, that's just part and parcel of our process, probably builds in a certain amount of delay if we insist on a sort of prior approval of cost overruns.
That is if they go over costs, and that is not necessarily going to happen if the projected costs are reasonable.
Well, I guess what I'm looking, though, is a suggestion for a process that, lets us do this, but again, doesn't unduly hold up the process.
Commissioner, Chairman Hoover, I'm thinking a little bit out loud here, but I'm thinking of the EV pilot, where the Commission has directed the utilities to file semi-annual reports, and they have often used those as a vehicle to request changes, additions in budget, or moving budget around. So if there is that sort of, and I think the question of regular utility reporting on these projects has also come up. So that could be a mechanism like that, where it's sort of formalized and regular, and so there's kind of an established process and a relatively efficient way of reviewing those filings.
Okay.
And to add on to that, I believe that's a similar process to what's happening in New York. They phased the projects into 5 phases, I believe. Stage 1 and Stage 2 are the preliminary design and engineering phases. And those are the ones that they have a current approval for spending amount on. But as they provide their quarterly reports, they do update the budgets for the rest of the staged implementation there. I'm not sure exactly how approval is proposed for the rest of the pilot. I would have to check that, but just wanted to mention that.
Okay, so one of your recommendations is that we just approve the Columbia project and not the Baltimore City project. But we were told by Delegate Charkoudian that one of her main motivations behind enacting this legislation was environmental justice. And while I'm not going to hold you to this, my comprehension of the social demographics of the two areas would indicate that the Baltimore City project probably has a stronger environmental justice angle to it than the Columbia project.
I'm not as familiar with the demographics of the specific areas, but my understanding is that the Warmth Act requires a certain percentage of the residents to be.
I understand, yeah, it does, yeah. And both these, for what I heard yesterday, both these projects do have low income, but I'm thinking more of just the historic nature of the two areas. Columbia is a fairly new suburban area, whereas the Coppin State project is, your typical central urban area.
Yeah, Chairman Hoover, I'll add. I think it's a valid question, and there may be trade-offs between the selection of the two projects in that respect. One of the reasons we ultimately favor the Columbia project, despite maybe the stronger nexus to EJ concerns with the Baltimore City project, is that there are other opportunities to achieve environmental justice through other types of policies. You can't explore the potential for network geothermal other than through this pilot. At least those avenues don't exist. And I realize the other avenues for, getting electric appliances into those people's homes, they're limited and they're imperfect. So it's not not saying at all that like it's easy to achieve the same goals through other means. But our focus here is, first and foremost, this is a pilot to learn about network geothermal, and we think that the Columbia project ultimately presents a better learning opportunity than the Baltimore City project.
Okay, and you had indicated that you think that the Warmth Act requires us to have this paid for by gas customers.
That's correct.
And obviously, WGL, because they're a gas company, that's pretty simple. BG&E is a little more complicated because they are a combination company. And I guess, if I remember right, I guess BG&E's attitude was, I think they agreed with that in concept, but their thought was if we decide to sort of spread it between the gas and electric company or gas and electric customers, they wouldn't necessarily object. I guess what I find out from you is, would you object?
Chairman Hoover, we would object. Again, we think the commission should apply the same cost recovery approach for both companies, since Washington Gas can't recover from Pepco's customers. We don't think it's appropriate for BGE to recover gas pilot costs from electric customers. And again, we think this is ultimately just a statutory interpretation, and we think the statute is pretty clear that since the obligation is on gas companies, there's simply not the option to recover from electric customers.
Okay. Let me see.
Mr. Chairman, I actually, I meet so many people. I actually think I know of a private developer in Washington, D.C. who is trying to do a project like this. I'm going to see, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask them to reach out to our staff, because if that's really happening, they actually have a project now. I can't believe I didn't remember this earlier. They have a project where they're putting piping into the Anacostia River to get the ambient temperature. Yeah, let me see if I can find his name, and I'll give that information to our staff. Thank you.
Last question. So there's been some suggestions that we might want to extend the time period to make this project happen. And, as you alluded to with the battery storage project, that became a big issue because stuff happened and timetables got pushed back and things like that. So now I know in your comments, you were sort of cautioned about, the problem with extending the time is that we, run the clock out on some of these other sources of money. I guess part of my thought there is, that's such a wild card at this point, because literally, you never know from one day to the next what the deal's going to be. But I mean, are you opposed to us extending the time frame, or is it
Beyond 3 years, do you mean, Chairman?
Yeah.
I'll let...
No, I don't think so. I think our comments said that we agreed that it's not feasible to do this amount of construction in 1 year.
Okay. Okay, I think that's everything for me. Thanks a lot.
Our final panel in this hearing will be the Commission's technical staff. I'll hand it to Mr. Dean to introduce the panel from the staff.
Morning, Chair, Commissioners, or good afternoon. For the Commission staff, we've got Alden Manka, Evan Thomas, Barbara Weber, Jamie Smith, for answering any questions, and me and Harrison share as the attorneys.
Louis Stupid, that's his name.
Next slide, please. So good afternoon. I'm Evan Thomas, as Mr. Dean stated, and we're excited to be here and to discuss these pilot proposals. And so here we just want to provide a general overview. Generally speaking, staff is supportive of approval of at least one pilot utility one pilot per utility, with modifications or conditions. And that's noted, some of them are noted in the safeguards bullet here, and we'll be talking about those later. And overall, we are just generally excited for the learnings, and hopefully we can highlight some of those today as well. So, next slide, please.
Okay, so why network geothermal? As everyone else has discussed, due to the high capital costs, the potential benefits of the proposed pilots are mainly in what can be learned. An individual geothermal system typically costs between $15,000 and $35,000 for a single house, whereas the proposed pilot cost will be upwards of $200,000 per residential unit. Unfortunately, the less expensive individual systems are typically not an option in densely populated areas due to land space limitations. A networked system allows customers to benefit from the same lower fuel costs by sharing a system with bore fields and ambient loop piping installed across property lines. Next slide.
So, good afternoon, Alden Manka on behalf of staff. As a general overview, as we've been talking about, there have been 3 total pilot proposals, 2 from BGE, 1 in Coppin State, 1 at Columbia, and then 1 from WGL. Here we just again present the costs of the pilots both before and after the external funding. We just want to emphasize that it is, again, important that this, external funding does come through, will help lower the cost, and that for BGE, if both projects are done, there are synergy savings between the two.
And, we've heard a lot about the projects already, so I guess I don't necessarily need to go into the specifics of, like the makeup of the buildings and everything. But there is a somewhat diverse set of buildings. In WGL, you have apartment complexes or apartment buildings that were built in the 50s, along with a newer apartment building that was built in roughly 2010, I believe it was stated, as well as single-family homes. The Howard County Columbia proposal is more suburban, with apartments, with the ice skating rink, with the community buildings, and the Coppin State project is obviously in Baltimore City, and is a more urban environment. So there is a variety of settings. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of going along with that. Just, I don't think we've seen a map with all 3 of them plotted, but just so you can see, obviously WGL's is in the DC metro area, right on the Montgomery County and Prince George's County line. Columbia is in Howard County, and Coppin State is in Baltimore City off of North Avenue. Next slide, please.
So as other parties have discussed, there are the BCA results, which again are calculated differently for BGE and WGL. With BGE, they compared the ground source heat pump to an air source heat pump baseline, which just that electrification baseline for, if it wasn't a ground source heat pump, would it be more effective to do air source heat pumps? This shows that it's a very, very close comparison. It also shows that the learnings could be very important. So long term, these ground source heat pump pilots could provide learnings that in the future could lower the costs for geothermal as a non-pipeline alternative.
And here we're highlighting the benefit cost analysis results. Obviously there's a large difference between the BGE numbers and the WGL numbers, and that goes into what OPC brought up previously, that WGL's baseline for the comparison is a gas baseline, or kind of like a business as usual baseline. And so if you were to change that to be an electrification scenario with air source heat pumps, we would expect the numbers to increase. We don't know, if it would be in the exact range of BGEs, but we would expect it to increase. And I do want to note that for WGL, here we're showing a 15-year estimated useful life with the utility cost perspective. WGL did a variety of expected useful lives. I believe they did a 2-year, a 15-year, and a 40-year, so this one's in the middle. And then in addition to the utility cost perspective, they provided the society perspective as well. And those values were slightly higher than the 0.26, which is shown here, but I think the highest value for the societal test came out to 0.33, so it's not significantly higher. And then I removed the funding from this 15-year UTC to get the 0.04, just to highlight, a lot of these benefits are from the funding. And so just to put that in perspective.
Next is just a discussion on the rate design for the participating customers. So as BGE discussed yesterday, they calculated these proposed charges for the participating customers by looking at the previous year of bills, looking at the range, high to low, and picking a number on the low end to try and fulfill that requirement of the Warmth Act, that participating customers do not pay more for the geothermal pilot service than they would for gas service. One of the proposals of OPC when calculating these participant charges was a 75% essentially rate for the participants for what the bill would be for the different classes. While some of the classes were at 75%, some of the, in particular, residential classes were more in the 50 to 60% range of what the expected average bill would be. And so staff would support the BGE's calculation of these charges just to lower the chances that any customers would end up paying more than they would for gas service. In addition to that, BGE also proposed that at the end of the year, they would review the customer accounts, and if a customer did end up paying more, they would be credited back the difference.
Looking at WGL's proposed participant rates, we can see that each of the three groups of buildings, if you will, or dwelling type has a separate or different proposed charge. So $12.50 for the Northwest Parks apartments, which account for, I believe, 180 of the 239 units, so that is the majority. $3 per month for Victory Oaks residents, which is clearly much lower than the other two. And then the single-family homes are proposed to be charged $30 a month. And the $3, the reason that is so much lower is because the Victory Oaks units currently are served by air source heat pumps. And so when looking at the bill differential between converting from air source to the ground source, all they're taking into account, or all that is taken into account, is the change in electricity. And so the ground source heat pumps are expected to be more efficient, and so the electric bills would be less. And so that's reflected there, and that's why it's so low. And so there's no gas side to the equation for the Victory Oaks units. Next slide, please.
Next, for the rate design for the non-participants, as we've heard discussed, BGE proposed collecting strictly from electric customers. OPC proposed collecting from gas customers. Staff has proposed something somewhat in the middle. where the verified transmission distribution costs or avoided transmission distribution costs would be collected from electric customers, and the rest of the costs would be collected from gas customers. Now, to facilitate this, staff would recommend that the Commission direct BGE to file our proposed rate design once they have, well, I mean before, but also after they have, an estimate for these verified costs. So staff does believe that this would be this combination is appropriate. We agree the Warmth Act is primarily for gas. It is primarily for non-pipeline alternatives. However, there are also other considerations like cost causation. This will, affect and have benefits to the electric grid from this, avoided extra build out. So it is appropriate that there is some collection from electric customers.
On the WGL side, WGL proposed a rider, and they proposed to charge the same flat monthly fee to all customer classes. So if you're a residential customer, you'd be charged the same fee as your large commercial customers. And depending on the level of external funding that is realized, WGL estimated that the bill impacts would, at peak, would be $5 to $8 a month, again depending on the level of external funding. And so overall, staff recommends that WGL provide an alternative proposal that allocates the revenue on a customer class basis, similar to what occurs in a rate case. This is kind of in conjunction with or in alignment with BGE, in that their capital expenses, for example, would be moved and examined into rate base in a rate case and be included in part of the revenue requirement, which would then, flow through into the cost of service study and the rate design, where a revenue allocation would occur to allocate that revenue to the customer classes to determine the rates. And so we are recommending that WGL, conduct an alternative revenue allocation and calculate rates after that, just to see what that looks like, because I believe WGL has roughly 6,000 customers subject to check. They have the most residential out of any other class, and so currently, you could say the majority of the revenue is collected from the residential customer class, and so just trying to be cognizant of the bill impacts on the residential customer class. This alternative allocation could kind of shift some of the revenue away from the residential customer class. And I guess just overall, WGL was estimating, so with WGL's rider, they are proposing to collect essentially O&M expenses during construction, and then the capital expenses would be collected during the 2 years of the operational period of the pilot. So it'd be like a 2-year amortization period. And so the entire cost of the pilot would be collected over that 5-year period. And so if you look at those 5 years, depending on the level of funding, the cost estimate per customer, depending on the level of external funding, the cost estimate per customer ranges from $120 to $190, and that would be consistent for every customer in WGL service territory, because under WGL's proposal, everybody's charged the same flat monthly fee. Next slide.
And here we just wanted to discuss some topics that were brought up by other parties. First was OPC's capital contribution discussion for the property owners. Staff does believe this is a reasonable idea. However, we don't necessarily want to require it at the moment. If there is too high of a capital contribution requirement, it could cause some of these customers to opt out or not want to participate in the pilot, which jeopardizes the future of the pilot. However, staff would recommend, similar to OPC, that the Commission require the utilities to file potential host contribution arrangements to provide more details on if there is a possible contribution that would be plausible. But we don't want to, at this moment, strictly require it, but we do want more analysis in that area.
I'll address the backup heating question. There was some discussion about whether or not that should not be allowed. And several parties mentioned that they had concern that this would negate the potential benefit of avoided transmission and distribution costs. So I just wanted to address that. In an ideal situation, the redundancy and the backup power that they're building into these pilots would prevent a geothermal outage of any duration, but unpredictable failures such as ambient loop damage or if both pumps should go out at the same time could leave the residents without any heat until the repairs can be made. In which case, staff recommends that backup heating not be ruled out until the risks associated with a possible outage have been evaluated and addressed, especially for vulnerable populations. Mainly, I was thinking of the Victory Oaks, which is a senior living facility, which is a place it would be difficult to evacuate people in the event of a long-term outage. And regarding desuperheaters, that came up also. So the type of desuperheater that might be relevant here is a secondary heat exchanger that's either incorporated in the heat pump or installed as a separate unit located between the heat pump and the hot water heater. And the heat given off by the heat pump's compressor is captured by the desuperheater and used to preheat domestic water upstream of the hot water heater. Adding this option could significantly reduce energy usage for hot water heating, primarily in the warmer months when the heat pumps are in cooling mode. However, staff does not believe that including desuperheaters should be mandated. This type of desuperheater works by transferring heat from air to water, whereas a geothermal system transfers heat from water to air. Hence, the learnings provided by adding desuperheaters to the pilots would be superfluous because the technology is already being used in other configurations. In addition, space constraints both inside and outside of the buildings would need to be considered. And unless a desuperheater in each residential unit can be disengaged in the wintertime, it will use heat that normally would have contributed to space heating, which could require the design to change, and they would need additional boreholes to make up for the additional heat loss.
And then an additional topic that came up was, conversation about I guess what we're phrasing it as the scope of WGL's pilot. For example, whether or not to remove the single-family homes or not. Some have suggested that it may be beneficial to do so to remove the single-family homes, which would reduce the cost. I think we heard WGL state that they clearly believe there's value in including them, and they made the point that most of their service territory is single-family homes. And additionally, I guess we want to point out that these are the only single-family homes in any of the proposed pilots, and so if they are knocked out of this project, then there would be none examined. And so staff does recommend that WGL file an updated kind of design analysis comparing the trade-offs of keeping and removing versus removing the single-family homes, just so that the commission kind of has information both ways. And then an additional concern, I guess, that we raised in our initial comments in Appendix B of our initial comments, which was kind of a summary of WGL's proposal, was related to the Victory Oaks Senior Living Facility. And so this facility, it's just one building. It was built in 2010. And as I understand it, the units themselves are currently served by air source heat pumps. I understand that the facility does have gas furnaces and I believe gas laundry, like shared laundry facilities. But I understand that WGL's project would take out the air source heat pumps and replace them with ground source heat pumps. And, while this proposal could provide data on air source to ground source conversion, I guess we just question whether that aligns with the kind of core objective of testing gas to geothermal retrofits. And so, we do recommend that WGL file an analysis of the feasibility and, the trade-offs of replacing the Victory Oaks with additional gas-served units, dwelling units. And I think logically, we would suggest Northwest Park, and I think we also stated in Appendix B, potentially examining single-family homes. But the single-family homes, we do recognize, like OPC pointed out, that there is a decent cost associated with them, so it may be more reasonable to do additional Northwest Park apartment units. So yeah, those are two just considerations regarding WGL scope. Next slide, please.
Okay, so Mr. Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. So let me start first with staff's response to some of the public comments that we received and the suggestion that we should emphasize the social impact more of these pilots in trying to determine whether or not we should adopt one. What was your reaction and response to that? Specifically focusing on, we had a number of panels from members of the public, primarily in the Washington Gas Service territory, focusing on the benefits that proposed project would have to indoor air quality. What did staff think of that?
I can take a stab at that. I mean, overall, I think it's positive that there is community support. I think that's great, and I think the commission should definitely take that into consideration. But I think it should definitely be one of the many considerations that the commission takes into account. But I think overall, we're very happy and I don't know if satisfied is the right word, but happy to see the public support.
All right. So we've had a lot of different conversations, panel discussions and conversations from panelists talking about different aspects of the pilot, proposed pilots. And even the staff a couple of times suggested that we should hear a little more from the companies at some point in the future, or that there should be an additional filing. So I'm thinking a lot about, assuming a pilot is adopted, what should we be doing now to make sure that in 2 years or 3 years, whenever the pilots are finished, that we get the information that we want, that customers will be paying for and maybe paying for a little longer than that. So I have a bit of a list of a couple of things that I know the staff is probably going to have to comment on and within the next couple of years. If it's not the four of you, it'll be 4 other members of the technical staff that'll have to sit there and respond to some of these issues. So let me start first with data collection. We had a couple of different parties produce comments suggesting that the data needed to be, for lack of a better word, apples to apples. But there's been some concern that the information may not be as readily available or that it might not be as clean and easy to access. Is the staff satisfied with what the companies have said in their comments here over the last couple days, yesterday and today, regarding their availability and willingness to provide data? Or is there something more that the commission needs to make sure is in an approval if we give one? To make certain that the data is available so staff can use it in a year or two?
I think generally we have been happy to hear the utilities say they're willing to provide the data. As we stated, there are some other reports we would like before any final decisions are made. But I think generally we are happy to hear that they're willing to provide the data that we would request on these pilots.
Okay. So there's been suggestion that there'd be additional meetings or I don't want to say the term work group, but I guess work groups, if that's what we're going to call them, where there'll be whatever metrics we think are necessary and whatever staff thinks is necessary, because the commissioners aren't going to be in those meetings. So I wanted to make sure that whatever we're clearly thinking that something's going to happen because we don't have that metrics and information today. It wasn't in the filings. And we had a lot of parties talk about what is out there in other places and what could exist. Our order is probably, unless you tell us to do so, and I encourage us to do so, our order is not going to detail out what should be in those reports in the future. So are you comfortable that whatever gathering or work group process is going to happen, assuming a project is adopted, that process will result in metrics that the utility companies will meet and will give you, and in exchange with that, when those reports are due in a couple of years, you will have what you need. Are you comfortable that process is there and capable and ready to go forward?
I think it's a little early on in the process for us to make too many conclusions on that, but that's something we'll definitely need to look into.
I think it would be similar to the energy storage pilot where we had work groups that went through and determined what type of information should be reported.
Okay. Okay, so you're suggesting that we should use that maybe as a model?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That's very helpful. You suggested that there be periodic reports from the utility companies. The companies, I believe, are at least willing to do that to some extent. Are you comfortable that those periodic reports either can be developed through the work group process, or is there something more the commission needs to do to make sure that you get what you need?
I believe that would be good enough, yes.
Okay. Let's see, I'm checking out my list here. Hold on.
I would note that the statute itself contemplates the development of regulations in certain sections, so there's going to have to be a work group anyway to resolve all this.
Well, yeah, okay. That's going to take a little time, so for a 2-year pilot, which kind of leads me to my next question regarding the sunset of the pilot and eventual transition to something else. That's where a lot of the data I'm talking about and those reports and analysis that is going to fall on the technical staff. You're going to be the ones doing a lot of that work for the commission. So is there anything that you think we need to keep in mind for that period of time when these projects have run their course, the reports have come in, and it's time for you to suggest to us what should happen next?
I think someone, was it the heat folks, recommended dividing the costs into 4 different categories. So that would probably be helpful to track the expenses in each part of the project separately.
Okay. All right.
It should be noted that the projects, from what we can already see, are going to be expensive, and they don't meet the cost-benefit analysis of being favorable. At the end of this, that result won't change.
Well, that is I appreciate the prediction. I agree with you, unfortunately, but I think it is what that is probably going to be very likely. Assuming, of course, they are adopted in the format that they are presented to us currently. Let me make sure. I had a conversation with the OPC. I only asked them one question regarding the utility company's proposal that, to the extent there are cost overruns, that they would file something with the commission to let us know, as opposed to adopting a flat figure in advance. Is that process, putting aside for a moment the question about whether or not it should be 10% or some other number, or if there should be a number at all, is a filing of that sort something that the staff would be willing to work with? Is that a process that you prefer, or would you prefer a number that sets it out up front?
I think we can agree with what OPC's comment was, that we can not, not have a specific number, but if they're going to go over, we should be notified.
Okay, sounds a little closer to what the utilities were saying, that's opposed to OPC. But I mean, if that's what you want to say, that's
Yeah.
fine. But
I think we need to be notified if they're going to go over. That, plain and simple. I don't know what the number should actually be, but if they foresee that it's going to go over, they should report that.
does it matter how far are they going to go over? Or?
Well, I think they should report what that amount, what they anticipate the amount should be.
Okay. Well, one of your, I forget which slide it was, but one of your slides, you suggested that you were, I don't remember which one it was. You were comfortable with some modifications moving forward with the pilots as they are now. Is that accurate? Did I say that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. If you're comfortable with the pilots as they are now, there's still some additional work we have to do to make sure that whatever we plan on learning and are going to learn, we will have that at the end. So, with the exception of the items that I just kind of went through with you, is there anything else that you think you might need that for some reason or another, maybe the companies didn't talk about it, the commissioners didn't ask about it, maybe it's not on your slides, but is there other information that you think you might need so that at the end we are comfortable with, you are comfortable with the reports that you have to provide, and we're not saying to ourselves, we wish we were still 2 years ago and we could have asked for this back then?
Well, without having discussed this with the rest of the staff party here, I think near the end, we're going to need to know how the customers felt or what their experience was. I don't think any of the projects have discussed a way of getting that type of information.
Okay.
We have some public comment right now, but being able to get that later on, assuming the projects are approved and constructed.
Okay. So some exit interview type of process or something to make sure that customers were, well, that they think this was still a good idea. They're going to spend a lot of money on it, so.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, you answered my other questions already in your presentation. I had questions about low-income protections and some of the other design detail questions, but you already answered those. So, thank you very much for your presentation. And if it's not me or not one of my colleagues, then hopefully 2 years or 2.5 years from now, you will have what you want. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
McLean.
Good afternoon. In terms of the additional analysis that staff wants from BGE and WGL, You've got some of them noted up there and some of them are not. Do you envision the commission approving the pilots, then getting your analysis, and then having the plans revised? Or does it make more sense, assuming, the commission agrees with you, says, yeah, we need this additional analysis, especially on the cost effectiveness, to go back to the utilities, run the analysis, and then submit a revised plan?
I think it might make sense to do it before approving, particularly for some of the ones like the bill impacts. I think those are important to know before approving the pilot. So I think it might make more sense to have the, revised additional data before approving.
Would you agree on the cost effectiveness as well?
I would think so, yes.
And staff, with BG's projects, if you had to pick one, you went with Coppin because it was more cost effective. Was that the only factor or the primary factor, sir?
It was not the only factor. We also thought that there were valuable learnings from doing the pilot in a more urban environment. We think that has potential moving forward to be really good to know.
Okay, thank you, sir. I guess this last one would probably be for you, Mr. Dean. Tell me why OPC is wrong on staff's proposal on the cost recovery, allocating the savings on the transmission and distribution, giving that on electric customers rather than giving everything to gas.
Well, the statute itself does mention electric companies, gas companies, and water companies as in the section on funding and costs.
Okay. Okay, no, I believe you. So maybe the statute's not as clear as OPC would like. So, but all right, thank you, Mr. Dean.
Commissioner Barbe.
No, they did a good job of predicting my questions.
I see. Okay. All right. So just so I'm straight, you think we should, when it comes to BG&E, that we should approve the Coppin project and not the Columbia project, or you're fine if we do both?
So staff would be supportive of approval of both. If one had to be chosen, staff would prefer Coppin.
Coppin over. Okay. All right. Thank you. What's staff's position regarding this cap that OPC proposed?
So staff is not supportive of a cap. We think it would be, there's a potential for it to go poorly. As the utilities mentioned, if there's a solid cap that can't be moved and they come up against something that would put them over the cap and it just causes the pilot to just stop, that would not be something that we would want.
Okay. And regarding the cost overrun situation, it's one thing for them to file notices with you or us, but what's your opinion about a requirement of some prior approval by us when it comes to any cost overrun?
We believe that may be appropriate.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And just to put a fine point on this issue about the cost allocation. So it's staff's view that we actually do have the authority under the Warmth Act to spread the cost in BG&E's situation between electric customers and gas customers.
I can say I didn't write a brief on it or anything, but just looking at the statute, it appears that there's some discussion on allocating costs to something other than a gas company.
I understand, but when I asked OPC about that, as to whether if we did that, would they in fact challenge us, and the response I got was yes. So I guess their view is that we can't do it.
Well, I assume OPC challenges almost everything that they don't get their way on.
No. Fair enough. Let's see. Oh, so on the BG&E proposal, your slide about the participant rate design. Do you know why there's such a big difference in the commercial rate between the Coppin project and the Columbia project?
So, as BGE stated, the rates are set based off the difference in the customer's previous 12 months of bills. So it would just be a difference between those customers, the commercial customers in Columbia, their past bills were this amount, and in Coppin it was this amount. It's not necessarily cost-based a difference between the two. It's just based on their historical bills.
I see, okay. And then one last question. What's staff's view of WGL's desire to have an incentive for them to do this work with the 100 basis point adder to their ROE?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Stu McCall on behalf of staff. So, yeah, we would not support that. Frankly, we would almost see it in the opposite direction. So this is legislatively mandated. So there's really no risk to the utility. So the fact that they would get an ROE adder for taking on less risk is counterintuitive. So yeah, so we would just totally disagree with that request. And they're not doing this out of they're not being innovative and doing this out of their own volition. They're required to do so. So.
Okay. Okay, I think that's everything for me. Anybody else? Oh, Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more follow-up question. It was on slide 6, I think it was. And the number's on the top, so. Yes, that was it. If I recall, the utility company, BGE specifically, stated that there was some savings benefit that accrued as a result of having 2 pilots. But if you only selected one, that there was some additional cost that would fall on whichever pilot was adopted. You were proposing that if you had to pick one, you'd pick one of them over the other one, obviously. Does your data here, or do you have a number that would reflect what would happen from a cost perspective if we selected one over the other one, taking into account the extra costs that they claim would happen?
I'm not aware if these BCA numbers are inclusive of that 13 million in savings or if they're calculated separately. I don't know that.
Okay. So I guess it would start on their end before you could even do the calculation.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, I think that's everything. I appreciate everybody's participation in this and the information you provided us, and we'll give this strong consideration. And with that, we're adjourned.